Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. I welcome you all in our first lecture of psycholinguistics. Today, we are going to discuss about the introduction of psycholinguistics. For references, you can consult Psycholinguistics 101 by Wendt and Introducing Psycholinguistics by Warren. Before discussing about psycholinguistics, first we must know about language and the importance of language. Language is a combination of letters, sounds, words, phrases, and sentences. We use language to share our ideas and information. Language is very important because language serves a central role in our daily lives. We can use language to share our complex thoughts and ideas, ordering lunch, reading a magazine, or persuading someone to do a favor. It's hard to imagine going through an entire day without using it, without reading, producing, or understanding a single word. Picture for a moment what it would be like if you needed to get a ride from a friend to the airport next Saturday, but couldn't use language in any form to communicate. How would you ask? Just imagine a life without language for a moment. Language is everywhere in human society, across every culture. It means we use language every time, everywhere, in every culture. For most people, it is an effortless ability that we acquire before we learn how to dress ourselves. People take it for granted. Some people feel that they even think using language, that an important part of their thoughts involves a kind of internal monologue. It means language is much important than we think. We can say that language is much important than we think. Even we think in language. In short, language is an integral part of our thoughts. Yet, language is not a simple thing. It is actually quite complex and we need to be able to use it quickly. In fact, its timing is so crucial that even minor delays during the processing of language are thought to have profound consequences. As we all know, communication, particularly verbal communication, is considered a quick and speedy process. The delay in production cause difficulties in sending and comprehending clear meaning of information sent by the sender. Here, we can understand that language is more complicated than it might first appear, and so it is the very ease of use that makes it so interesting. As language seems complicated, it is very simple as well. Let's start with an analogy to understand this phenomena. Walking around is also pretty easy for most people, and it is something that we usually learn to do even before we learn how to talk. But can you explain exactly how it works? How each muscle, bone, and tendon allow us to defy gravity at every step? It is easy to do, but hard for a layman to explain how it works. Instead, it takes an army of biologists, physiologists, and others to explain this easy skill. Language is very much the same. Its function is easy to master when you are young, but hard to explain. It means it is very easy, but very difficult to explain how it works. And like walking, we have a lot to gain by understanding it. The centrality of language in our daily lives means that any disturbance to our ability to use it may be keenly felt. The worse the disturbance, the more devastating the impact. Language plays a central role in our speech and communication. Any delay or disturbance creates a devastating impact, like failure of proper speech. It happens because of certain factors. This disturbance, or we can say that this disruption, can come as part of aging. It can come from developmental problems, and it can come from damage to the brain or other body systems that impact our ability to perceive or produce language, such as damage to our hearing. In all of these cases, the disruption may be relatively small. Perhaps difficulty in finding the right word or understanding a very complex or unusual language. It can cause seemingly some minor issues in speaking. It can cause seemingly some minor issues in speaking. For example, finding the words according to the situation. But it can also be quite severe, from a complete loss of nearly all language to a particularly difficulty with production or understanding even fairly simple sentences. Of course, research on how this breakdown occurs can help us better understand how to help restore language function. If these problems occur in any individual speech, then they can be identified. Psycholinguistics helps us to find out the solution of these problems. But even research on how language processing works in a fully functioning system is very important, because it can provide us with a model of language processing that can then be used to develop more effective therapies for people with disruption to their language ability. So, by understanding how language works and how we are able to use it, we can understand a vital yet complex part of our daily lives, offer ideas for how to help people with language disorders, and perhaps even shed light on how we acquire, comprehend, and think. As we have discussed the rationale of studying psycholinguistics, now we move towards the theoretical understanding of psycholinguistics. First question arises in our mind that what is psycholinguistics? As the name suggests, it is a branch of linguistics in which someone studies any phenomena in the intersection of linguistics and psychology. But this does not really answer the question. So, before understanding this, first we must know that what is linguistics? Linguistics is the scientific study of language. What is psychology? Psychology, the scientific study of human behavior and cognition. For example, how we think. The union of these two fields is principally concerned with the processing and knowledge representation that underlie the ability to use language and how they relate to other aspects of human cognition. We can say that psycholinguistics is actually a combination of linguistics and psychology that deals with how to use a language and how they relate to other aspects of human cognition. In short, psycholinguistics asks the question how it is that people are able, moment by moment, to produce and understand language, and by extension, how do children come to have this ability? How do children come to have this ability? How and why? It is sometimes impaired after brain damage. Now, we discuss the definitions of psycholinguistics. The study of the relationships between linguistic behavior and psychological processes, including the process of language acquisition. This definition focuses on the relationship between linguistic behavior and psychological process. Second definition tells us that psycholinguistics or psychology of language is the study of the interrelation between linguistic factors and psychological aspect. Here, the focus is given on linguistic factors and psychological aspect. Third definition tells us that psycholinguistics is the study of how individuals comprehend, produce, and acquire language. This definition tells us the three levels of language which are studied in psycholinguistics. For example, comprehension, production, and acquisition. As we have discussed in definitions that psycholinguistics involve the study of psychological aspect or factors, it takes the theoretical understanding of the psychological aspect from the other disciplines. For example, psychology. As the term psycholinguistics is a little bit misleading in that it minimizes the contribution of about a half dozen other fields of scientific research. To truly get to the bottom of how language works, we need expertise not only from linguistics and psychology, but also from other scientific fields such as neuroscience and computer science. The study of psycholinguistics is a part of the field of cognitive science. The study of psycholinguistics is a part of the field of cognitive science. Now, here is the question: what is cognitive science? Cognitive science is the study of thoughts, learning, and mental organization, because the whole endeavor of psycholinguistics often finds a home in the broader research field of cognitive science and interdisciplinary field that addresses the difficult question of how animals, people, and even computers think. Psycholinguistics is also concerned with psychological and neurobiological factors that enable humans to acquire, use, comprehend, and produce language. The discipline is mainly concerned with the mechanisms in which languages are processed and represented in the mind and brain. Modern research makes use of biology, neuroscience, cognitive science, linguistics, and information science to study how the mind brain processes language, and less so the non processes of social sciences, human development, communication theories, and infant development, among others. There are some important points which are necessary to be discussed here. Psycholinguistics is concerned with the cognitive faculties and processes that are necessary in order for grammatical forms of language to be produced from a mental grammar and the lexicon. It is also concerned with the perception of these construction by a listener. Psycholinguistics stresses the knowledge of language and the cognitive processes involved in ordinary language use. Psycholinguistics are also interested in the social rules involved in language use and the brain mechanisms associated with language. Contemporary interest in psycholinguistics began in the 1950s, although important precursors existed earlier in the 20th century. It means the modern psycholinguistics came into being 70 years ago. Now we discuss the scope of psycholinguistics. The common aim of psycholinguistics is to find out about the structures and processes which underlie a human's ability to speak and understand language. Psycholinguistics involves language processing, reading, writing, speaking, listening, and memory. It means we have to understand the processes involved in reading, writing, speaking, listening, and memorizing. Psycholinguistics also involves lexical storage and retrieval. How, how are words stored in our minds and then used? It also studies language acquisitions. How a first language is acquired by children. Psycholinguistics also studies special circumstances like twins, deafness, blindness, and brain damage. Further, it deals with the brain and language unique to human evaluation and part of the brain concerned with language. Lastly, it also discusses second language acquisition and use, bilingualism, how a second language is learned. All these points show that psycholinguistics is very important with regard to understanding of language acquisition and its processes. So now we move on to the last part of the lecture, how psycholinguistics can be done practically or how a psycholinguist works. A psycholinguist studies the way human learns, understand and use language. Psycholinguists also examine the effects that the use of language has on human social dynamics. A speaker's choice of words and the manner in which he speaks, for example, can lead listeners to infer what personality traits the speaker might possess. The field of psycholinguistics spans several related topic areas, including cognitive psychology, behavioral neuroscience, and psychological disorders. In addition, a psycholinguist might find himself specializing in specific areas of study such as semantic, phonology, and speech therapy. In general, a psycholinguist dissects every aspect of human language and attempts to produce practical applications for his findings. An expert trained in the field studies both written and spoken language. The progression of words in a statement and the manner in which an idea is expressed. He or she then applies existing psychological theories to his or her observation in an effort to gain a fuller understanding of how people adapt language for their purposes. The entire field can be broken down into specific areas of interest, each with its own uses in working towards scientific and social progress. So, that was all about the introduction of psycholinguistics. For further references and study, you can read the books mentioned here. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.